The morning was crisp and cool, the kind where the air feels alive with possibility. June 4, 2010, began like any other day in Portland, Oregon. A light mist clung to the trees, their green leaves glistening under the pale sunlight. At Skyline Elementary School, the parking lot buzzed with the usual chaos of parents dropping off their children. Laughter and chatter filled the air as students hurried inside, their backpacks bouncing with each step. Kyron Horman, just 7 years old, was among them. His bright smile lit up his face as he proudly stood in front of his science fair project, a poster on the red-eyed tree frog. The classroom smelled faintly of glue sticks, markers, and the faint metallic tang of excitement. Kyron's stepmother, Terry, stood close by, snapping a photo of him with his project. Her voice was light as she praised his work, though there was something unreadable in her expression. The picture would later become iconic, frozen in time, a moment that seemed so ordinary, yet would come to symbolize so much more. The vanishing. The bell rang, signaling the start of the school day. Backpacks were shuffled into cubbies, sneakers scuffed against the tiled floors, and the hum of routine began. But Kyron wasn't in his seat. At first, no one noticed. The teacher assumed he was in the restroom. His classmates thought he'd simply stayed behind to look at the other projects. But as the minutes stretched into hours, the absence became impossible to ignore. The classroom felt emptier without him, the energy subtly off-kilter. By the time the afternoon rolled around, panic had begun to bubble beneath the surface. Terry had reported dropping Kyron off at school that morning, but no one remembered seeing him after the science fair. His name echoed down the hallways as staff and students searched every corner of the building. The gymnasium, the library, even the storage closets. Nothing. Only silence answered their calls. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. The search begins. The news spread quickly, like wildfire. Parents began arriving at the school, their faces pale and drawn. The police were called, their radios crackling with urgency as officers arrived on the scene. The once busy schoolyard now stood eerily still, the laughter of children replaced by the low murmur of worried voices. Posters with Kyron's smiling face were printed and distributed within hours. Search parties were organized, combing through the dense woods that surrounded the school. The trees stood tall and foreboding, their branches casting long shadows in the fading light. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, every rustle of leaves sending shivers down spines. Volunteers called his name, their voices echoing into the void. But the woods held their secrets tightly. No footprints, no torn fabric, no sign of Kyron. A mother's fear. Kyron's mother, Desiree Young, was distraught. Her hands trembled as she clutched the phone, her voice breaking as she spoke to the media. "Please, bring my son home," she pleaded, her eyes red and swollen. The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, suffocating and relentless. She replayed the morning in her mind over and over again, searching for answers. What had gone wrong? How could her son, her baby, simply disappear? A turn in the case. As the days turned into weeks, the focus shifted. Attention fell on Terry, Kyron's stepmother. Her story remained consistent. She had dropped him off at school and watched him walk toward his classroom. But cracks began to form beneath the surface. Witness accounts didn't align. Security footage failed to confirm her version of events. And then there was the polygraph test. Terry took it twice, and failed both times. The air in the community grew heavy with suspicion, whispers spreading like an infection. What does she know? Why won't she tell the truth? Terry's once friendly demeanor became guarded, her smiles tight and forced. Her world shrank as the public turned against her. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, no direct evidence tied her to Kyron's disappearance. The suspense deepens. The investigation spiraled into a labyrinth of questions with no clear answers. The police searched Terry's home, her car, her phone records. But every lead seemed to dissolve into nothingness, like smoke slipping through their fingers. The media frenzy intensified, cameras flashing outside the Horman home. The weight of the spotlight was unbearable, casting long shadows over everyone involved. Desiree refused to give up, her determination a flickering light in the darkness. She organized vigils, her voice steady as she vowed to find her son. "Kyron is out there," she said, her words both a promise and a plea. But as time marched on, hope began to waver. The school felt emptier without him, the hallways haunted by his absence. His seat in the classroom remained vacant, a grim reminder of the boy who was no longer there. And still, the question lingered, heavy and unanswered. What happened to Kyron Horman? The forest holds its secrets. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a group of searchers ventured deeper into the woods. The air grew colder, the trees looming taller, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. A faint sound caught their attention. A rustling, faint and almost imperceptible. They froze, their breath hanging in the air. "Kyron?" one of them called out, their voice breaking the stillness. But there was no response. Only the whisper of the wind and the distant call of a bird. The group pressed on, their flashlights cutting through the encroaching darkness. And then, one of them stopped abruptly. Their beam of light had landed on something unnatural. A piece of fabric caught on a thorny bush, its color faded but distinct. It was red, the same shade as the shirt Kyron had worn that day. A chill ran through the group as they stared at the fabric, their hearts pounding in unison. The discovery sent a ripple of shock through the community. Was this the break they'd been waiting for? Or was it another dead end in a case that seemed destined to remain unsolved? As the searchers gathered around the piece of fabric, a sense of urgency washed over them. They carefully documented the find, their hearts racing with a mix of hope and dread. The fabric was retrieved and sent for forensic analysis, but the waiting felt unbearable. Days turned into agonizing weeks, the community holding its breath as they awaited answers. Desiree continued her fight, her resolve unwavering, but the emotional toll was evident. She often stood outside the school, clutching flyers with Kyron's face, hoping someone would remember something. The calls from the media became less frequent, the public's attention waning, but she refused to let Kyron's name fade into obscurity. Then came the news that would shake everyone to their core. The fabric had been confirmed as belonging to Kyron. But instead of relief, dread settled heavily in the pit of Desiree's stomach. Where had it been found? Why was it there? The police decided to widen the search, canvassing areas surrounding the school and Terry's home once more. They uncovered new leads, whispers of past incidents that hinted at darker secrets. One such lead involved a neighbor who reported seeing a strange vehicle parked near the school that day. The description matched a car belonging to a man with a troubled history. Authorities quickly moved to investigate. As they dug deeper into the man's background, disturbing details emerged. He had been involved in several suspicious activities, including past run-ins with the law. The community's fears heightened as they learned that he had been seen in the vicinity around the time Kyron disappeared. The woods that had once felt safe now seemed menacing, shadows lurking in every corner. The investigators set up a surveillance operation, hoping to gather more information. But as they watched and waited, a sense of impending doom filled the air. Weeks passed, and the investigation took a toll on everyone involved. Desiree remained steadfast, but the emotional weight of uncertainty was suffocating. One night, as she lay in bed, she imagined Kyron's laughter, the way his eyes sparkled with joy. She could almost feel him beside her, a gentle reminder of hope amid the despair. Then, a phone call shattered the silence of the night. The police had made an arrest, a shocking turn in a case that had seemed to stall. Terry was taken into custody, her face pale as she was led away in handcuffs. The news spread like wildfire, reigniting the community's interest. But the details surrounding the arrest were murky, leaving more questions than answers. As the trial approached, tension gripped the town. Desiree attended every hearing, her heart racing as she watched Terry's demeanor shift from defiance to desperation. The evidence presented was circumstantial, but it painted a troubling picture. Witnesses testified about Terry's behavior leading up to Kyron's disappearance. The prosecution painted her as a woman driven by jealousy and fear, a narrative that felt both familiar and unsettling. Desiree often left the courtroom with a heavy heart, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that Kyron was still out there, somewhere, waiting for someone to find him. The unraveling. As the trial progressed, more unsettling evidence came to light. Terry had made several questionable decisions in the days surrounding Kyron's disappearance. She was linked to a series of strange online searches, exploring topics that made investigators uneasy. The courtroom was filled with tension as each piece of evidence was laid bare. But still, no solid proof of Kyron's fate emerged. The defense painted a picture of a grieving stepmother, overwhelmed by the pressures of parenting. But whispers of guilt lingered in the air, heavy and palpable. Desiree clung to hope, but doubt began to creep into her mind. The shocking climax. Then came the day that would change everything. The jury announced a verdict, not guilty. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, the collective disbelief palpable. Desiree felt her heart shatter, the weight of despair crashing down on her like a tidal wave. The questions that haunted her remained unanswered, the void of Kyron's absence growing more profound. As Terry walked free, a sense of injustice hung in the air, suffocating and bitter. The community was divided, anger and frustration boiling over. The lingering mystery. Months passed, yet Kyron remained missing. The investigation continued, but the trail had grown cold. The fabric found in the woods became a haunting reminder of what was lost. Desiree never stopped searching, her determination unwavering. She organized events, raised awareness, and kept Kyron's name alive. The case became a symbol of hope and resilience, a story that refused to be forgotten. And as the years went by, the shadows of that fateful day continued to linger. A mother's promise. On the anniversary of Kyron's disappearance, Desiree stood outside Skyline Elementary once more. With a heavy heart, she released balloons into the sky, each one carrying a message of love and hope. "We will find you, Kyron," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. The community gathered around her, united in their resolve to keep searching. Each year, they honored Kyron, sharing stories, memories, and hopes for the future. "You are not forgotten," they said, their voices strong and unwavering. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, a sense of peace settled over Desiree. Though the mystery of Kyron Horman remained unsolved, the love for him endured. In the hearts of those who knew him, he would always be a bright light, a reminder of the importance of hope and the relentless pursuit of truth. The years had passed, yet the mystery of Kyron Horman's disappearance refused to fade. Desiree Young's determination to uncover the truth had not wavered, even as the world seemed to move on. The case hung over Skyline Elementary, like a dark cloud, a chilling reminder of the boy who had vanished into thin air. Every year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, the community gathered to remember him. Candlelight vigils illuminated the night, their flickering glow casting long shadows on tear-streaked faces. "This isn't over," Desiree would tell the crowd, her voice unwavering. But as the years dragged on, the hope of finding Kyron alive began to dim. Until one day, an unexpected call would reignite the case and send shockwaves through the entire community. It came on a quiet autumn evening, the kind where the leaves swirled in golden spirals under a fading sun. Desiree was at home, surrounded by photos of Kyron, when her phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was urgent. "We found something," the detective said, his tone grave. Her heart stopped for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We need you to come in." The drive to the precinct felt endless, her mind racing with possibilities. Had they found Kyron? Was he alive? Or was this the news she had dreaded for over a decade? The chilling discovery. When she arrived, the detective greeted her with a somber expression. On the desk in front of him was a box, its surface worn and scuffed. Inside were items recovered during a new search of the wooded area near the school. There was a small shoe, caked in dirt, but unmistakably Kyron's. A tattered piece of fabric, red, like the shirt he wore that day. And a Polaroid photograph, faded but clear enough to send a chill down her spine. It was Kyron. He was sitting in a dimly lit room, his face pale, his expression vacant. Behind him, the walls were lined with shelves, cluttered with tools and strange objects. Desiree's hands shook as she stared at the image, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "Where did you find this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The detective explained that the items had been discovered in an abandoned shed deep in the forest. The shed belonged to someone who had been on their radar for years, a man with a history of troubling behavior. The race against time. The discovery sent the investigation into overdrive. Search teams descended upon the property, combing through every inch for more clues. The air was thick with tension, the smell of damp wood and decay filling their nostrils. Inside the shed, they found more Polaroids, images of other children, their faces blurred and unrecognizable. The walls were covered in scratch marks, the kind that made their stomachs churn. It was a place that reeked of malice, a place where innocence had been stolen. But there was no sign of Kyron. Not yet. The detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle. The man who owned the shed had disappeared years ago, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. But now, they were closing in. Desiree joined the search efforts, her resolve unshaken despite the mounting horror. She trudged through the woods, the cold biting at her skin, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Every rustle of leaves made her heart race. Every shadow seemed to hold secrets. The forest was alive with sounds, branches snapping, owls hooting, the distant murmur of a stream. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a place that seemed to breathe with its own dark energy. As the hours dragged on, the search party grew weary, their hope fading with each passing moment. But then, a shout pierced the air. "Over here!" Desiree's heart leapt as she ran toward the voice, her feet slipping on the damp ground. When she arrived, she saw the searcher pointing to a shallow pit, partially covered by leaves and debris. The earth had been disturbed recently, the soil darker and looser than the surrounding ground. The team worked quickly, their hands trembling as they unearthed what lay beneath. The shocking climax. What they found sent a wave of nausea through the group. It wasn't Kyron, but it was another child. The remains were skeletal, the clothing tattered and unrecognizable. The realization hit them like a freight train. This wasn't just about Kyron. This was bigger. Much bigger. The shed, the photographs, the remains. It all pointed to a predator who had been operating undetected for years. The forest held more secrets than they could have imagined, each one darker than the last. Desiree fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as the weight of it all crashed over her. "Where is he?" she cried, her voice breaking. The detective placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes filled with sorrow. "We'll find him," he said, though the words felt hollow. The search continued into the night, the forest illuminated by the eerie glow of flashlights. Every step brought them closer to the truth, but also deeper into the darkness. And as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, they knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The forest, once alive with the soft whispers of wind and rustling leaves, now felt suffocating. The searchers moved with both urgency and trepidation, their flashlights slicing through the dense undergrowth. Each step seemed heavier, the silence around them thickening with an almost tangible weight. The discovery of the skeletal remains had shifted everything. This wasn't just about Kyron anymore. It was about uncovering a darkness that had lurked in the shadows for far too long. But for Desiree, it was still personal. Her son was out there somewhere, and she would not leave these woods without finding him. The cryptic message. As the search continued, one of the officers stumbled upon a clearing. In the center was a tree, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal arms. Carved into its bark were symbols, strange, jagged etchings that seemed to form a pattern. Beneath the marks was a single word scratched into the wood: Kyron. The sight sent a chill down everyone's spine. The name was fresh, the cuts in the bark still oozing sap. Desiree stared at it, her hands trembling. "This is a message," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But was it a clue, or a taunt? The air seemed to grow colder as they stood there, the weight of the message pressing down on them. A lead emerges. Back at the command center, investigators pored over the evidence found in the shed. One of the Polaroids caught their attention. It showed a man's hand, identifiable by a distinctive tattoo. The image was blurry, but it was enough to spark a memory for one of the officers. "I've seen that tattoo before," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. The man in question had been questioned years ago in connection to another missing child case. At the time, there hadn't been enough evidence to arrest him. But now, with the Polaroids and the remains, it was clear he was connected. The man had a name, Martin Greaves, and he had a history of disappearing whenever the spotlight got too close. The chase. The police wasted no time. Armed with a warrant, they raided an address linked to Greaves, a rundown cabin on the edge of a neighboring county. The place reeked of decay, the air thick with the stench of mold and rot. Inside, they found more photographs, more disturbing images that hinted at the horrors Greaves had perpetrated. But Greaves himself was nowhere to be found. Desiree, who had been waiting anxiously outside, felt her heart sink. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice breaking. The officers assured her they were doing everything they could, but the frustration was palpable. The clock was ticking, and every moment that passed felt like another piece of Kyron slipping further away. A haunting discovery. As the search expanded, the investigators uncovered something chilling in the cabin's basement. A hidden room, its walls covered in newspaper clippings about missing children. In the center of the room was an old desk, its surface cluttered with maps, notes, and photographs. Pinned to the wall above the desk was a map of the forest surrounding Skyline Elementary. Several locations were marked with red pins. One of the pins was placed directly over the clearing where Kyron's name had been carved into the tree. The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. Greaves had been watching the search. He had been playing a game, moving pieces on a board only he could see. The final search. Armed with the map, the search teams refocused their efforts. The red pins marked a path, a twisted trail that seemed to lead deeper into the forest. Desiree insisted on joining the team, her resolve unshaken despite the danger. The group moved cautiously, their flashlights casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air grew colder the further they went, the trees closing in around them like silent sentinels. Every sound, every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves set their nerves on edge. And then they found it. A small, makeshift shelter hidden beneath a canopy of branches. It was crude, constructed from tarps and wooden planks, but it was clear someone had been living there. Inside, they found a single item that sent Desiree to her knees. It was Kyron's backpack. The discovery of the shelter set off a chain reaction. The police were now certain Greaves was still in the area, watching them, waiting. They set up a perimeter, their radios crackling with updates as they closed in. The forest was alive with movement, officers combing through every inch of the terrain. And then, as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, they found him. Greaves was crouched near a stream, his clothes filthy, his face gaunt and unshaven. For a moment, he didn't move, his eyes darting wildly as he realized he'd been caught. "Where is Kyron?" an officer demanded, his voice sharp. Greaves said nothing, a twisted smile creeping across his face. The sight of it sent a wave of anger through the team, but they held their composure. He was arrested on the spot, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. The truth unveiled. Back at the precinct, Greaves was interrogated for hours. At first, he refused to speak, his silence maddening. But as the evidence mounted, the Polaroids, the remains, the map, his resolve began to crack. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he described the events of that day. He admitted to being at Skyline Elementary, watching from the shadows as the science fair unfolded. He had seen Kyron, his bright smile and curiosity drawing his attention, and he had followed him. The details of what happened next were too horrifying for Desiree to listen to. But one thing was clear. Greaves had taken Kyron, and he had kept him alive for some time. The final clue. Greaves led the police to another location, deeper in the forest, where he claimed Kyron had been kept. The site was a small cave, hidden behind a waterfall. Inside, they found remnants of a makeshift camp, blankets, food wrappers, and a notebook filled with Kyron's handwriting. Desiree clutched the notebook, tears streaming down her face as she read the words her son had written. He had been alive. He had held on for as long as he could, but there were no remains at the site, no sign of Kyron himself. Greaves smirked as he was led away, his refusal to give a clear answer fueling the fire of frustration and despair. A mother's triumph. Despite the lack of closure, Desiree refused to give up. She turned her pain into purpose, creating a foundation in Kyron's name to help other families of missing children. The community rallied around her, their support unwavering as they vowed to keep Kyron's memory alive. The forest, once a place of fear and darkness, became a symbol of resilience. Every year, on the anniversary of Kyron's disappearance, Desiree led a walk through the woods, retracing the steps of the search. and though the mystery of his fate remained unsolved, she found solace in the belief that he was watching over her. "I will never stop looking for you," she whispered to the stars one night, her voice steady and full of love. The end, or the beginning? Kyron Horman's story does not end here. It is a story of loss, of pain, but also of hope. It is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of love and determination can shine through. And though the answers may never fully come, Kyron's legacy lives on, in the hearts of those who knew him, and in the fight to bring every missing child home. The forest still holds its secrets, but one thing is certain: Kyron will never be forgotten.